Now, Liam Rosenior is one of a handful of candidates who will be considered to take over from Enzo Maresca.
When Liam Rosenior brings his football to Stamford Bridge, the Premier League finds its next problem. This is a 41-year-old English coach currently operating inside the BlueCo ecosystem, has just taken a mid-table League One side and pushed them into European qualification, using one of the youngest squads in France, a possession-heavy system, and a development-first model that mirrors Chelsea's long-term project almost too perfectly to ignore.
But what are we going to do? Are we going to come back to 2-2 when we start the game badly and just take a 2-2 or even lose the game 3-2? Are we going to show some fucking balls and win the game?
This is a coach who trusted an entire under-23 outfield 11 in a top-flight match. A coach whose team finished 7th in League One, qualified for the Europa Conference League, and then secured a long-term contract extension despite interest from England. So why is his name now being whispered around Stamford Bridge? Why does his tactical profile align so cleanly with Chelsea's recruitment strategy, loan model, and squad age curve? And why would this move represent one of the boldest, most high-risk decisions in modern Premier League management? Because this isn't just about a coach, it's about a system, and what happens when that system reaches the Premier League. This is why Chelsea are looking in this direction, and why the rest of the league would be forced to pay attention. Before Liam Rosenior's name started getting thrown around for bigger jobs, his story was being shaped by something that matters more than ever at clubs like Chelsea: learning how to build through systems. He was born in Wandsworth, London on July 9th, 1984, and got into senior football young. At just 17, he made his professional debut for Bristol City on April 20th, 2002. Within seconds of coming off the bench, he registered an assist in a 1-1 draw with Stoke City. That moment matters, not because it was spectacular, but because it set the tone for what his career would become. Rosenior never followed the star player path. Instead, he took the route that quietly builds football intelligence. Different clubs, different managers, different demands, constant adaptation. In November 2003, Fulham signed him for £55,000, a small fee, but a huge step up. Now he was learning the Premier League's speed, its pressure, its standards from the inside. His debut season told you everything you needed to know about what kind of player he was. Not flashy, not a highlight reel, but involved, trusted, and capable of holding his own against serious opponents. In December 2004, he made his league debut against Manchester United and was named Sky Sports Man of the Match. From there, he moved to Reading, had a loan spell at Ipswich under Roy Keane, and then found his defining chapter at Hull City, the club where he became a genuine leader rather than just a squad option. He made 161 appearances for Hull and played in the 2014 FA Cup final. By the time he retired, his career total stood at 444 senior appearances. This context matters. Rosenior's football wasn't built on dominance or individual brilliance. It was built on solving problems. Fullback, winger, different systems, different tactical setups, the kind of background that often produces coaches who think obsessively about structure. He also got a taste of the international game. He represented England at U21 and U20 level, earning 11 combined caps and scoring once at U20 level. Again, not a headline-making international career, but it added another layer. Tactical education in highly structured environments where roles are strict and details decide everything. When he retired in 2018, he didn't walk away from football. He stayed at Brighton, working with their development group. That's a key detail because Brighton's entire identity revolves around coaching, structure, and player development. From there, his coaching path became clear and deliberate. He joined Derby County's first-team staff in 2019, became assistant manager to Wayne Rooney in 2021, took over as interim manager in 2022, and won 7 out of 12 games, a strong short-term record that turned heads across the EFL. Then came his first real project job, Hull City, appointed in November 2022. Hull didn't suddenly become perfect under him, but they became organized, harder to beat, more purposeful. They finished 7th in the championship in 2023/24, narrowly missing out on the playoffs before the club surprisingly decided to part ways with him in May 2024. And then came the twist that makes this whole conversation so interesting. On July 25th, 2024, Rosenior was appointed head coach of Strasbourg, a club owned by BlueCo. Right from the start, he made a statement about what kind of coach he was. On August 18th, 2024, in his League One debut at Montpellier, a 1-1 draw, he named a starting 11 where every single outfield player was under 23. It was a bold signal about trust, development, and identity. Within a year, Strasbourg finished 7th and qualified for the UEFA Conference League, and on April 25th, 2025, Rosenior signed a contract extension running through June 2028. So when people ask why his name keeps coming up in conversations about bigger jobs, it's not because he's got a cabinet full of trophies. It's because his entire career, both as a player and as a coach, points in one very clear direction: systems, development, structure, and modern training ground philosophy. Whether a top club ever takes that chance on him is the next part of the story, because the real Chelsea angle here isn't a rumor or a headline, it's a pathway. To understand why Liam Rosenior's name keeps coming up in conversations around Chelsea, you first need to understand how Chelsea think about football now. Not tactically, not emotionally, structurally. Since the BlueCo takeover, Chelsea have stopped operating like a club that just hires a manager and reacts to results. Instead, they've been building something closer to a football ecosystem, where recruitment, squad age, contracts, loans, and coaching philosophy all sit under one strategic umbrella. This is why Chelsea's squad has become one of the youngest in Premier League history, why contracts now stretch to 6 or 8 years, why the club has invested so heavily in potential rather than proven stars. And once you look at the club through that lens, something important becomes clear. Chelsea don't just hire managers anymore. They promote profiles that fit the system. When BlueCo acquired RC Strasbourg Alsace, it wasn't positioned as a vanity purchase or a commercial side project. It was built as a functional extension of Chelsea's football operations, a controlled environment where young players could get senior minutes, tactical ideas could be tested without Premier League scrutiny, coaches could work inside the same ownership philosophy, data, methods, and development pathways could align. In other words, Strasbourg became a laboratory, not for winning at all costs, but for proving a process. When Rosenior was appointed at Strasbourg in July 2024, it wasn't because of his reputation or trophy cabinet, it was because his background already lined up with what BlueCo were trying to build. By that point, Rosenior had worked inside Brighton's development structure. He'd coached under Rooney at Derby. He'd managed a full championship season with Hull City. He'd shown he was comfortable working with young, technically developing squads. And he'd demonstrated a clear preference for positional structure and controlled possession. That mattered more than his win percentage, because Strasbourg under BlueCo was never designed to chase short-term survival. It was designed to reflect principles. Rosenior's first major statement at Strasbourg didn't come in a press conference. It came on the team sheet. In his League One debut, he named a starting 11 where every single outfield player was under 23. That's almost unheard of in a top 5 European league. That decision wasn't reckless. It was a declaration of philosophy. And over the course of the season, Strasbourg finished 7th in League One and qualified for the UEFA Conference League. They did it with one of the youngest squads in the division, and they maintained a clear possession-based identity rather than resorting to survival football. This wasn't Strasbourg overachieving through luck or grinding. It was Strasbourg executing a plan. Now zoom out, not to Stamford Bridge, but to Chelsea's squad construction. Chelsea have invested heavily in players aged 18 to 23, long-term contracts, technical profiles over short-term physical fixes, loan pathways that prioritize minutes and system learning. That kind of squad doesn't thrive under reactive management. It needs coaching patience, tactical clarity, and trust and development. That's why the conversation around Rosenior exists at all. Not because Chelsea need him right now, but because his profile already operates inside their logic. One of the most significant shifts under BlueCo has been the emphasis on internal progression. At Chelsea, this has shown up in promoting staff who understand the model, recruiting managers who align with the recruitment department, not override it, treating coaching as part of the structure, not the structure itself. Rosenior's rise inside the same ownership group fits that philosophy perfectly. And just as importantly, his contract extension to 2028 at Strasbourg tells you something else. He wasn't rushed, he wasn't extracted, he was trusted where he was. That matters, because genuine pipelines aren't built on shortcuts, they're built on continuity. This is where the narrative often gets twisted. This isn't about Chelsea poaching a manager from Strasbourg. It's about Chelsea recognizing a coaching profile that already already exists within their ecosystem. If anything were ever to happen, it wouldn't represent a gamble on some unknown outsider. It would represent a continuation of a process already underway, one that values tactical structure over personality, development over instant fixes, and alignment over autonomy. That doesn't make it risk-free, it makes it deliberate, and this is where the Premier League angle becomes impossible to ignore. Because if a club with Chelsea's resources fully commits to a system-led coaching pathway, the implications go beyond one appointment. It means young squads become more dangerous over time, not less. Recruitment and coaching stop working against each other. Tactical identity becomes stable instead of seasonal, and rivals can't just sit back and wait for another Chelsea reset. That's why this discussion exists, even without official headlines. Not because something has happened, but because the structure already makes sense, and the next chapter is where that structure meets the pitch. Once you strip away ownership links, rumors, and speculation, the most important question becomes very simple. What kind of football does Liam Rosenior actually coach? Because modern elite football doesn't reward vague ideas. It rewards repeatable behaviors, clear principles, and systems that survive pressure. And this is where Rosenior's profile becomes genuinely interesting. Rosenior's football identity is inseparable from his background. As a player, he was never the star. He was the connector, a fullback or winger asked to understand spacing, timing, and responsibility across different systems. That experience shows up clearly in his teams. Whether at Hull City or RC Strasbourg Alsace, Rosenior's sides are defined less by individual brilliance and more by clarity. Clear build-up patterns, clear positional responsibilities, clear ideas about where control should come from. This isn't reactive football, it's planned football. On paper, Rosenior has often been listed as a 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 coach. In reality, those labels only describe the starting point. In possession, his teams consistently shift into a 3-2 base and build-up, with one fullback tucking inside, the opposite fullback pushing high and wide, and central midfielders staggered rather than flat. This is textbook modern positional play, designed to create numerical superiority in the first phase, maintain short passing options under pressure, and reduce exposure to counterattacks. At Strasbourg, this structure allowed a very young squad to move the ball with confidence rather than panic, a crucial detail when coaching players aged 18 to 22 at top flight level. One of the biggest misconceptions about possession-based coaches is that they chase the ball for aesthetic reasons. Rosenior's teams don't. At both Hull and Strasbourg, possession has been used as a defensive tool as much as an attacking one. The goal is control, not dominance for its own sake. His teams tend to build short from the goalkeeper, with center backs splitting wide, a single pivot dropping to offer security, and vertical passes only played when defensive cover is already set. This explains why his teams rarely look stretched even when pushing numbers forward. They attack in layers, not waves. One of the most important aspects of Rosenior's tactical model is how forgiving it is for young players. That matters. Young squads struggle most with defensive transitions, decision-making under pressure, and positional discipline when tired. Rosenior's answer has been structure. At Strasbourg, where he regularly trusted one of the youngest average starting XCs in League One, the system did the thinking before the player needed to. Spacing was predefined, passing lanes were rehearsed, pressing triggers were collective, not individual. This is why the decision to field an entire under-23 outfield 11 in League One wasn't reckless. It was calculated. Out of possession, Rosenior's teams don't press like they're trying to win the ball back at all costs. There's no constant high press for spectacle. Instead, pressing is trigger-based, directional, and designed to funnel opponents wide. The first line of pressure is compact rather than aggressive, focusing on blocking central lanes, forcing long passes, and winning second balls in structured zones. This approach limits exposure, especially important for young center backs and developing midfielders. At Hull City, this often resulted in lower shot volumes conceded than peers around them, with games decided by fine margins rather than collapses. At Strasbourg, the same logic allowed a mid-table squad to compete consistently without relying on physical superiority. In the final third, Rosenior's teams are patient but deliberate. Attacks are usually built through wide overloads, late midfield arrivals, and cutbacks rather than hopeful crosses. Fullbacks play a key role, either inverting to overload midfield or stretching play to create isolation for wingers. This suits technically gifted players who may not yet be physically dominant, again aligning with youth-heavy recruitment. The emphasis is always on high-quality chances, controlled shot selection, and avoiding desperate phases of play. Here's the key question that decides whether this football matters beyond mid-table leagues. Does it scale? The answer is, structurally, yes. Rosenior's model doesn't rely on underdog grinding, it doesn't require peak physical dominance, and it doesn't break if possession drops slightly. It's a framework that improves as player quality improves, which is exactly why it becomes relevant when discussing clubs with elite resources. Give this system faster center backs, press-resistant midfielders, and wingers with consistent end product, and it becomes more dangerous, not less. This chapter isn't about pretending there are no questions. There are. Can this control survive Premier League pressing intensity? Can patience survive media pressure? Can development survive short-term expectations? Those questions don't disappear. But what matters is this. The football itself isn't naive. It's modern, layered, and intentionally designed for growth. And when people talk about why this profile keeps surfacing in elite conversations, this is the reason. Because the system doesn't look like a stepping stone. It looks like a foundation. Up to this point, everything about Liam Rosenior's journey makes sense when viewed through structure, philosophy, and progression. But elite football isn't decided by logic alone. It's decided by pressure. And this is where the conversation changes, because moving from projects to giants isn't a tactical upgrade. It's a psychological one. The Premier League isn't unique just because of the talent. It's unique because of the relentless exposure. Every decision is televised, analyzed, debated in real time, and judged weekly, not seasonally. For a coach whose strength lies in process, this environment can either accelerate belief or suffocate it. At mid-table or development-focused clubs, progress is measured in months. At elite Premier League clubs, progress is measured in match days. That difference is everything. Any discussion around Chelsea must start with context. Chelsea's current squad is one of the youngest in the league and one of the most expensive ever assembled. It's built on long-term contracts that demand coaching continuity. That combination creates a paradox. On one hand, youth demands patience. On the other, investment demands results. This is where modern managers struggle, not because they lack ideas, but because their timelines don't match the environment they're walking into. For a coach like Rosenior, whose methods rely on repetition, positional learning, and tactical literacy, the question isn't can the football work, it's will the environment allow it to breathe. There's a subtle but critical difference between a system that functions and a system that wins under expectation. In League One or the Championship, controlling games and staying competitive is often enough to build belief. At Chelsea, control without conversion quickly becomes a narrative problem, because possession without dominance gets labeled sterile, slow, or naive, even when the underlying structure is sound. This isn't hypothetical. It's a cycle that's consumed far more experienced managers. One of Rosenior's biggest strengths has been working with young squads, players hungry for instruction, and dressing rooms without major egos. Elite squads are different. Even young elite squads come with reputation, transfer fees, external noise, and national team status. Managing that dynamic isn't about tactics. It's about authority without being authoritarian. This is where inexperienced top-level managers get tested hardest. Can the coach enforce structure without stifling talent, demand patience without losing belief, rotate without destabilizing trust? At elite clubs, those questions arrive immediately, not gradually. At development clubs, tactical explanations are accepted. At Chelsea, they're interrogated. Every dropped point becomes a debate about philosophy, a referendum on recruitment, a proxy war about ownership. This matters because coaches who rely on process are often judged before the process matures. Rosenior's football asks players to think before acting, hold positions under temptation, and trust spacing over instinct. That kind of football looks best after time. The Premier League often doesn't give that time. If such a step were ever taken, it wouldn't be conservative. It would be one of the boldest strategic commitments in modern English football. Not because the coach lacks intelligence, but because the club would be choosing alignment over insurance. What they'd be saying, we trust structure more than reputation. We trust development more than noise. We accept short-term turbulence for long-term identity. That's rare at the elite level. This distinction matters. High-risk decisions fail when they're rushed, reactionary, or disconnected from the squad they inherit. This profile is none of those things. It's youth-aligned, system-compatible, ownership consistent, which means if it fails on execution, not on logic, and that's why the debate exists at all. Rivals don't fear names. They fear direction. If a club with Chelsea's resources commits fully to tactical tactical continuity, youth development, and system-led coaching, then improvement becomes compounding, not cyclical. That's what forces the league to adjust, not panic. So the question is no longer, is this coach good enough? The real question is elite football ready to let a process mature? Because the football is clear, the structure is clear, the pathway is clear. What remains uncertain is whether pressure allows clarity to survive. And that's where this story truly turns. This discussion was never really about one name. It's about what Chelsea want to be. Under their current ownership, Chelsea have committed to youth, long-term contracts, and a system-led approach built on development rather than quick fixes. That model demands alignment from the touchline, structure over improvisation, teaching over firefighting. That's why profiles like this even enter the conversation. Chelsea don't lack talent or resources. What they've lacked is continuity, a clear footballing identity strong enough to survive pressure, poor runs, and noise. Now the choice is simple. Keep cycling through resets, or fully commit to a coherent, long-term football idea. Because when a club of Chelsea's scale stops chasing short-term answers and starts building with intent, the impact doesn't arrive loudly, it compounds. And that's why the rest of the Premier League would be watching closely.